Hello again. I was just talking about how we're constantly being formed. And my friend and I, it applies to all of us, working dads and moms. Most of us are just working too much outside the home. But one thing that we are teaching our children about being a dad and being a mom and being a spouse is to work hard. And to provide. Those are very important parts of being a parent. So continuing now in the sermon, I'm going to move on to a wonderful new documentary that I've been watching about the disabled rights movement in the 1970s, which built on and followed in the wake and the way of the civil rights movement of the 60s. The movie was called Crip Camp, and I highly recommend it. It was about how some of the, move out of the bright shining light there. It was about how many of the kids, the activists who were a part of this really important movement in U.S. history, found their start. They found themselves. They found their voices at a summer camp called Camp Jened up in New York. They learned who they were. They learned how life in community is meant to be, rather than being pushed aside and being put in the basement of schools, if they're allowed to go in there at all. Instead, they were welcomed and they were told and shown, more importantly, over and over again, that they were human beings just like everybody else was a human being, and that they had the same potentials as every other human being. And they did this as they were listened to, as they learned to raise their voices, as they were fully accepted, and as they became friends with so many people. Please watch the movie. When they grew up, they followed in the wake, as I mentioned, of the civil rights movement. They realized that the same rights that African Americans had rightly demanded should be theirs as well, including full access, no longer segregated educations. And they went to the halls of power. They went to the House of Health and Welfare, the office there in San Francisco, and they broke the law. Just as Jesus went to the hall of power, the synagogue, the community place of power, and broke the law by healing the man on the Sabbath, technically, according to at least one interpretation of the law, so too did these people break the law by sitting in for 24 days. They slept and they endured and they demanded their rights. The law, which had been passed in 1971, had not been forced at all in society, and they were demanding that it be enforced. And when the government was not responding to them, about 2 weeks into this, they sent about a dozen of them on a plane to Washington, D.C., where they ramped up the pressure. And the result of all of this action was newfound health and freedom and access in our society. And it was really, really a blessing to behold. When Jesus was presented with the disabled man at the synagogue, he asked, is it right to save life or to kill? Today's the day. That man might not have seen Jesus again. Jesus was on the move. And so if Jesus didn't heal that man that day, it's possible that he might not have gotten healing. And every day is the day of salvation. And just as it was right to spend billions to make buildings and public transportation accessible to our specially abled, it is right now to invest in the health and the well-being of the sick and the poor. My goodness, if this healthcare crisis that we are going through, excuse me, I'm getting a phone call. If this crisis has taught us anything, it is that those who are sick have a right to be cared for. That is what the last three passages that I studied this week in the YouTube Bible study, in all of them, salvation was the gift of God, and it was a free gift of God. And Jesus fought for the rights of the leper in the countryside. He fought for the rights of the hungry, his own disciples in the grain fields. And he fought for the rights of the disabled man in the synagogue, the right to health, the right to be cared for. And it is time for us to move in that direction. God is wanting us. Yes, it's going to cost billions. But my goodness, we're already treating people in the emergency rooms. Is there not a more just and fair and cost-effective way to provide health care to people instead of making them wait until it is an emergency and they have to go to the emergency room? I have to pause again. Thank you for your consideration. I'll be back in just a few to conclude my sermon.